Thank you. I've been listening to the contributions, particularly from my colleagues, and I mean it's been a very informative debate. And I suppose just to say thank you to our witnesses that have joined us today and taking the time to be with us. I know Dr. Muldoon, Dr. McCauley, and Mr. Castillo there as policy officers. So thank you very much for your time. I suppose a lot of questions have been asked previously by my colleagues here, and again, very interested in the debate as well by some of the deputies there, particularly around when a child's capacity perhaps has changed in a medical way, and where the medical, I suppose, it takes precedence, especially when it's a matter of life or death, or in those circumstances I think that have been outlined previously. But just returning, I suppose, just some of the points that you have mentioned here as well, just in your opening statement. You know, the importance, I think, which is so great to hear. I mean, you've acknowledged, I suppose, that the legislation here is looking at strengthening the voice of the child, but that your group, like you're the Ombudsman, the office here, is about the rights of children under the age of 18, and that the voice of the child is heard. And I suppose you've given some good examples there that, and I think it might have been Dr. McCauley, about how it's about reaching consensus with the child. And I suppose that's an important aspect of this, that consultative process is done where the child's voice is heard, and that there may be some ways to reach a consensus, maybe position with the child and the parents, and particularly in the type of facility. I suppose maybe I just might explore that, maybe point a little bit more, as in what potential scenarios or outcomes might you see, maybe one or two scenarios where there would be an importance with that, hearing that the voice of the child, that might lead to a positive outcome for both the mental health of the child as well. And then I suppose just, you have mentioned very clearly, of course, that, you know, that children not been admitted to adult facilities and so on. The challenge we have, of course, is access to places when children are in acute episodes. And I suppose just when a child is in a very acute episode, perhaps just an example of what that might look like when they are going through this process. I suppose for the Ombudsman office, there's probably guidance that's available there for parents in dealing with these sort of traumatic situations. But is there anything here in the legislation that needs to be added in terms of, in a crisis, acute situation, is there another element that needs to be added here? And I appreciate everything that you've given us in terms of your detail here, the advocacy role that you've mentioned as well. But yeah, those are just two comments. And again, I know that you've gone through a lot of the finer detail with my colleagues earlier, so Germagas.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I suppose, if I've picked you up right, I mean, in regards the possibility of and you said it well, consultation to reach consensus, you know, and again, that almost steps away from the medical process or the medical model that's been in place for 100 years. It's the patriarchal idea that I know best and I'm going to medicalize you to make you better. You're now talking about consultation and consensus, and you know that's really is children's rights to its core, and I think the legislation is moving in that direction, which is hugely positive. Some of the examples, again, the ones that strike me in these, if you talk about the most difficult one, and Deputy Kenny talked about, the most difficult one is bringing a child in, I would say. Some children just won't want to go in, so the negotiation, the engagement with them, the understanding where they're coming from, understanding their fears, trying to allay them, and then still maybe having to bring them in anyway. That sort of discussion is probably the most important one, because that's obviously at a time of acute episodes, as you talked about before. And then the other negotiation that I think is hugely important is sometimes children don't want to leave, because this has become their safe space after 6-8 weeks in an inpatient unit. It could be very scary to go back out into the other world, the world they left, where they may have been hurt and where the harm or the negative thoughts became larger than life for them. So that negotiation, their best interest is taken into consideration then, and you can see that with many of the medical or many of the circumstances. Children will oftentimes go out for a weekend, and then it could be back in for them 5 days, and then they go out again. So it's working with the child to get the best way to support them to go back into the world. So that's a real example of listening to the voice of the child and the different things. The acute episodes, again, maybe as you said, I think that might cross over there. The concept of a child being at the worst, lowest ebb whether they've been taken out of a river with an attempted suicide or alcohol or drugs or whatever it might have been that brought them to this stage of a suicide attempt. Access to child-centred, specialised services is crucial. And I suppose that's why we're pushing for the zero tolerance in regards to admission to adult units, because all that happens in the adult unit is that you're put into a room on your own and you're specialed. Somebody sits with you. That's all they do. They sit with you. And we've had situations in which children can be seriously afraid of the individuals around them who may be in serious psychotic episodes and may be much bigger and stronger than them. So if we've got a child in an acute episode, we've got to provide the services, and the flaw is on our side as a government and as a state if we don't provide those services. That's why we feel that the openness to providing or to allowing children going into those units when necessary has to be, the time has come to call on that and to make it a zero tolerance around it, so that we need to get in there, invest our resources and make sure that no child in the worst case that they can find themselves in the most terrible traumatic situation they find themselves in, has to face an additional trauma on top of that. I heard a radio interview last week of a man talking about even 24 hours in an adult unit really set him back by about 2 years in his recovery. He was 17 at the time. So we really need to move forward on that. I hope that touches on the answers you wanted, Senator. If not, please feel free.
The experience you've mentioned there is crucial to understanding the impact. I think that's what we need to understand, like that it will set people back if it's a type of facility that causes more angst and anxiety than healing. Sorry, I suppose the other questions were just, and it may be a little bit outside of this, but sometimes I wonder about the supports in place for the adults around the child to bring them down the right path. Sometimes it's a lack of awareness, a lack of knowledge, and I suppose I know that you've spoken here just about we have the legal representative, the appointment of the guardian. I know you're talking about the intermediate person status as well, but just that there is that the people around the child are able to provide and allow for that child-centred approach to take place. And there's a lot of factors in that. I suppose this legislation is a good step in the right direction, but, and your contributions here, I think, are very appreciated on that as well. So, sorry, I suppose those were just final comments.
Thank you, Senator. I suppose just on that, I think that's where the advocate will also be hugely beneficial to the family. The wider sense of, if you have somebody who knows the system, has worked with it, knows the individuals in each unit, and knows what the child is going through and can support the child and the family, I think the advocacy service will be worth its weight in gold for all of those people.